There's a place, a silence so heavy it presses in on you, swallowing every creak of timber, every whisper of wind through the Bavarian woods. A place where the rhythm of life was once set by farm work and church bells, nothing more. Ordinary, quiet, safe. Or so the family who lived there believed. But what if that sense of safety, the idea that your walls could shield you from the world, was only an illusion? What if those same walls became a trap, sealing you in with something unspeakable? This is the story of Hinterkaifeck, a farmstead buried deep in rural Germany, where in 1922, 6 people were murdered in a way so brutal, so unsettling, that the case has never been solved. It's a story that still grips people a century later, not only because of the killings, but because the murderer stayed for days among the dead. They fed the animals, they lit the stove, they ate the family's bread, and then, as if swallowed by the forest, they disappeared. Hinterkaifeck wasn't even a real village, just a lonely farm a few miles outside the town of Gruber, half hidden by trees. The Grubers lived there. Andreas, 63, known locally for his hard edges, his wife, Kate Celia, 72, their widowed daughter, Victoria, 35, Victoria's 2 children, little Kate Celia, 7, and Joseph, just 2. The family's world was one of soil and sweat, season after season repeating itself. To outsiders, their lives may have looked uneventful, but in the weeks before the murders, unease began to creep in. It started with footprints, fresh tracks in the snow leading to the house, but none leading away. Andreas found them, and he couldn't shake the feeling someone had been watching. Then came the noises. At night, footsteps echoed in the attic. Andreas searched with a lantern, found nothing, but the sounds returned. A house key vanished. Then the lock on the tool shed, where heavy farm equipment was stored, was broken. Andreas told neighbors about these things, though most dismissed them. But one person took it seriously, the family's former maid. She had quit months earlier, saying she heard voices in the house, footsteps when no one else was home. She told people the farm was cursed. By late March 1922, the Grubers hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner. She arrived on March 31st. Within hours, she would be dead. What exactly happened that night is pieced together from speculation, autopsies, and witness testimony. But here's what most investigators believe. Sometime in the late evening of March 31st or the early hours of April 1st, the killer lured family members one by one into the barn. Perhaps by a sound, an animal disturbance, a call from outside. Inside, each was struck down with a mattock, a farm tool with a heavy iron blade. Andreas was killed first, then little Kate Celia's mother, Victoria, then Andreas's wife, finally 7-year-old Kate Celia. She didn't die instantly. Strands of hair pulled from her own scalp showed she lived for hours after the blows, terrified and in agony. The killer covered their bodies with hay and barn doors. Back in the house, Maria, the maid, was slain in her bed. 2-year-old Joseph, still in his crib, was killed where he slept. Both were covered afterward, the maid with her blanket, the child with Victoria's dress. And here the story twists from horrific to nightmarish. For days after the murders, the farm seemed lived in. Smoke rose from the chimney. Neighbors heard the dog barking, then quiet. Livestock were fed and milked. Bread was sliced from the kitchen loaf. On April 1st, a passerby saw smoke and thought little of it. On April 2nd, a farmer noticed no one from Hinterkaifeck had shown up to church. On April 3rd, school reported young Celia absent. Mail piled up. Finally, on April 4th, neighbors forced their way in. In the barn, they found 4 bodies stacked under hay. Inside, they discovered Maria and the toddler. 6 lives extinguished.
By today's standards, the investigation was compromised almost immediately. Villagers swarmed the farm before police secured it, trampling footprints, moving objects, even touching the bodies. When Inspector Georg Gruber and his team arrived from Munich, they did what they could. They photographed the scene, performed autopsies in the barn itself, and confirmed cause of death, blunt trauma from the mattock. But fingerprinting was never attempted, and physical evidence was sparse. One of the greatest frustrations came later when the victims' skulls, kept for forensic study, were destroyed during World War II bombings. The farmhouse itself was demolished the following year, erasing what little remained. At first, robbery was suspected, but the Grubers were relatively well off, and investigators found money in the house untouched. Whoever killed them wasn't after gold marks. What was left suggested something more personal: covering bodies, feeding animals, staying in the house. Whoever it was, they didn't just kill, they inhabited the Grubers' world for a while. Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Attention soon turned to a neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was among the first to discover the bodies. Some found his behavior odd, entering the house with a key, disturbing corpses before police arrived, even pointing directly to the barn where the bodies lay. Rumors swirled that Lorenz had been romantically involved with Victoria, and might even have been the father of little Joseph. A motive, perhaps, born of jealousy or dispute. But Lorenz denied involvement. His family vouched for him, and though suspicion lingered for decades, no evidence tied him to the crime. He eventually sued those who accused him and won. Karl Gabriel. Another theory centered on Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel. He was reported killed in the First World War in 1914. His body never recovered. After the murders, whispers spread. What if he hadn't died? What if he returned, enraged by Victoria's rumored relationship with her father, Andreas? Stories emerged of a German-speaking Soviet officer who boasted of the murders. But when checked, details never lined up. No proof Karl survived the war has ever surfaced. The Gump brothers. In the 1950s, 2 brothers, Anton and Adolf Gump, became suspects. A sister allegedly implicated Adolf on her deathbed. Anton was even detained briefly, but again, the case collapsed without evidence. Other names: drifters, vagrants, farmhands, the Bichler brothers, a mechanic who visited the farm the very day of the murders but wasn't questioned until years later. Each theory sparked interest, but none ever stuck. The surviving testimonies only deepened the mystery. A neighbor saw smoke from the chimney days after the family had already been killed. Another claimed to have seen 2 shadowy figures on the property at night. The mechanic who repaired the engine on March 31st recalled spending hours there without seeing any family members. He later wondered if the murders had already begun. And then there was the former maid, who years earlier quit because she believed the farm was haunted. She later named men she suspected, though nothing was proven. These fragments feed theories but never tied together cleanly. Over 100 people have been investigated, questioned, or rumored over the years. Theories range from the plausible to the fantastical. Some say a drifter lived secretly in the attic, watching the family until finally striking. Others insist the killer had to be someone who knew the Grubers personally, perhaps intimately. In 2007, students at the Bavarian Police Academy re-examined the case as a cold case exercise. Their conclusion? A definitive answer is now impossible. Too much evidence was lost, too many witnesses gone. Privately, they favored one suspect, but never named him out of respect for living relatives. Hinterkaifeck became more than a crime scene. It turned into a story told across generations, retold in newspapers, novels, even films. Journalists at Süddeutsche Zeitung and Donaukurier still revisit it on anniversaries. Locals long kept a shrine at the site until it was removed a century later. The farmhouse is gone. The skulls are gone. All that remains are scattered documents, contradictory testimonies, and a silence that refuses to give up its secrets. So what do we make of it 100 years on? We know 6 people were brutally murdered. We know the killer or killers lingered in that house, living among the bodies. We know suspicion tore at a small community, with rumors destroying reputations but proving nothing. And we know that despite the work of police, journalists, historians, and amateur sleuths, the mystery endures. Perhaps that's why Hinterkaifeck grips us still, because it forces us to confront unsettling questions. How safe is the world we think we know? How well do we really know our neighbors, our family, ourselves? And perhaps the most disturbing thought of all, what if the killer walked away into the forest and was never caught? Not because they disappeared, but because they were always right there, hiding in plain sight.